Hello, welcome to Compelling. I'm Katy Wellesley Wesley. With 18 years of experience in the art world, ranging from senior positions at blue-chip galleries to startups, I'm now a Paris-based consultant to brands, foundations, artists, and collectors. Thank you for joining me to listen to Compelling, a podcast exploring the intersection of art, culture, and luxury. I'll be interviewing visionary artists, cultural leaders, and brand innovators to find out how storytelling, mastery of craft, and collaboration come together to build community, engage audiences, and shape lasting legacies. Compelling offers listeners fresh perspectives on the ideas and aesthetics shaping luxury businesses and culture today. My guest today is Tokini Peterside-Schwebig, entrepreneur, cultural producer, and the visionary founder behind ArtX Lagos, West Africa's leading international art fair. Tokini is deeply dedicated to reshaping how African creativity is seen, valued, and connected, not just within the continent, but on the global cultural stage. Through her leadership of ArtX and its expanding ecosystem, she has created infrastructure that empowers artists, nurtures emerging talent, and bridges local creativity with global audiences. In 2025, ArtX Lagos marked its 10th edition, a decade after its debut, with expanded programming, international participation, and initiatives that have helped position Lagos as a dynamic cultural capital, and the fair as an essential fixture in the global art calendar. This milestone reflects not only sustained growth, but also Tokini's influence in integrating contemporary African art into international discourse and building a thriving creative ecosystem that serves artists across the continent. I'm so excited to welcome Tokini. Tokini Peterside-Schwebig.
Yes.
Thank you very much for agreeing to be a guest today on Compelling. As you know, this is a podcast in which we try to sort of lift the lid on interesting stories within the worlds of art and luxury and culture. And I would say that you really are sitting at the crossroads of all three because of what you've done and the founding of ArtX Lagos and your career that came before. We're going to come to all of that, but I'm going to start, if I may, with where you grew up and the environment that you were in. What did young Tokini's world look like?
So thank you, Katy. And thanks for having me as a guest on the podcast. I'm happy to be here. Mm-hmm. And where do I start? So my childhood, was it creative? 100%. Mm-hmm. I spent a lot of my time, thanks to my parents, and we were living in Lagos. I was born there and grew up there. I spent a lot of my time at art classes, dance lessons, music lessons, everything my mother especially could do to connect us with our ability to be creative, she did. She had all these fantasies of having a huge band made up of her 3 children. Never happened. But we were very much encouraged to explore the creative sides of ourselves. Even little things like when I would dream when I was very young, my mother would encourage me to write all my dreams out as stories. And then I began to aspire to become a writer. And growing up in Nigeria in the late 80s, early 90s as a young child, they were very troubled years for the country. So when I look back now, it's actually quite remarkable that my parents and their close circle of friends managed to immerse these children in these worlds where we were just free to run with our imaginations. And that was really what sparked my interest in the arts and in creativity. Mm-hmm. And the part of the country that I'm from as well in Nigeria is known for its performance theater, its dance, its music, almost magic in a sense. And I spent many formative years there as well, traveling between there and Lagos. So my childhood was very colorful, it was very musical, it was very art inclined, and it was a wonderful foundation.
So you mentioned that those were troubled years. Growing up, were you very aware or were you quite well insulated from it?
Completely insulated. I think to a year that's really pivotal in Nigeria's history, which is 1993. In fact, there's a specific date, June 12th, 1993, which is when one of the freest and fairest elections we'd ever had was annulled by the military regime at the time that was meant to be transitioning out. And it later spiraled into another coup, and then we spent many years under military administration. And I recall that day, I was 7 years old, seeing anger in the streets around me, seeing pressure and tension, but very quickly being whisked away back into a world of play. So my siblings and I were very fortunate with our close group of family friends in those years that actually our parents decided to completely insulate us from what was happening in the country. Because to be fair, we were too young to process it. But that said, I do know other young people who were less insulated and so had to process this at a very young age. That tension, that turmoil, the fear as well. We were lost in our imaginations, dreaming of make-believe and play and wonderful things. And in a sense, creativity became, for myself and my siblings, a wonderful outlet, a wonderful space to explore.
So by the time that you were probably 13, you went to, I'm guessing 13,
12.
because I know that you then went
Yes.
to be educated in the UK.
Yeah.
And that must have been a huge culture shock. And I'm interested in how you think that continued to form you, and being displaced from Lagos and having this wildly different experience. It must have had an impact on how you regarded, I don't know, the country that you'd come from, but also the rest of the world.
Yes, it did. I mean, I went off when I was 12.
Yeah.
And that was in 1998. And 1998 was a very tough year in Nigeria. The country was under a very repressive military regime. And my father was a young entrepreneur at the time, and he'd been running his institution for about 10 years by that time. And my parents took the decision that my brother and I should go to school in England because things were getting tense in the country, and my father was very vocal against what he saw as the wrongs of the military. So my brother and I were shipped off and my sister stayed behind. And going off to England in itself was not a culture shock because both my parents were educated in England. I spent a lot of summers in London. We had an apartment in London as well. But the shock came when I realized that all of these girls I was meeting in this big British boarding school had a very, very different impression of the part of the world that I was from than I did. And in a sense, almost felt that their opinion of the place that I was from was what was valid, as opposed to my opinion, being the person who experiences the place and is from it. And I instantly discovered that being Nigerian was not seen by these British girls I was meeting as a thing of pride. And I was immensely proud to be Nigerian because I was coming from a country whose richness I knew of in terms of just the extraordinary quality of the people and the human beings that I knew as my community, the expressions of art and creativity, the food, the laughter. I loved my home. I loved my country. Yes, I may speak of these as difficult years politically, but for those of us who were young kids, we loved our country, at least those of us that I was mixing with. And so coming to a big British boarding school and saying I was Nigerian and seeing in the reaction of the next person that their interpretation of that was different from mine was first a challenge, but then actually I challenged myself to do something about it. And within a handful of years, friends started to call me the unofficial cultural ambassador for Nigeria or minister of culture because I felt so strongly about this place that I was from. I had such love for it that I felt that I had to, and I was 12 when I took this oath, I had to personally do everything within my power that I could to explain to people that their perception of this place, as at that time, was flawed, and that I could do everything that I possibly could to expose them to the country that I knew and loved.
This is an education system that I came through as well. So I think you might be highlighting something that probably lots of British people who were privileged to go to those schools would identify with, which is that there is a kind of narrowness of vision. Most of those girls that you were around, they probably just didn't have a global outlook. You know,
Not
they
at all.
weren't They weren't exposed to different cultures in the way that you already had been by that point. You mentioned your father was an entrepreneur, and you already had that spirit in you, it sounds like, at 12.
I was always coming up with ideas.
Yeah.
And I was always coming up with ways to solve things. My father was an entrepreneur. He'd launched an investment bank when he was 33 years old. He was very young.
Wow.
He was the youngest bank entrepreneur, I think, still to date in the country's history.
Is he still working?
He is, but not on the bank. And he has a number of businesses that are now family businesses, one of which is in private aviation. My father influenced me greatly. His rigor, his determination, his discipline. My mother, who was and still is a psychologist, was a really interesting counterbalance to that. Extraordinarily creative and fluid and just so easy. And navigating between the two of them really shaped me in the sense that they're yin and yang in a sense. And my mother especially, I can credit with a lot of what my journey has been. Giving me that freedom to think beyond the obvious or conservative paths. Because when I was in that British boarding school, I was a huge lover of art and fashion and film and music and literature especially. Literature was my greatest love in those years. And I dreamt of being involved in that world with a father who hoped that I would become a banker. So when I later wound up at another boarding school in London and then decided to study law, there was still a lot of questioning within me as to where I could find my place. I knew from my creative explorations in my childhood that I was not the artist. And so I wound up at the LSE in London studying law and very quickly was immersing myself with friends who were Nigerian in many cases across various universities, but desiring to be so much more than the very strict and orthodox lines of study they were pursuing to please their parents. And I became that go-to for every friend who desired to be a fashion designer or filmmaker or photographer. I would spend time with them, talking with them about their dreams and what they hoped for. Then we'd develop projects together and I would manage those projects and help them execute and help them really think about going to the next level of what they wanted to do. And that eventually evolved into internships with publishing houses and supporting fashion designers. And I was just keeping very busy.
How did that track take you into LVMH, into the luxury world?
So how it took me into the luxury world, in fact, I remember my first real conversation at LVMH in Nigeria with Davide Markovic, who at this time was the president of Moët Hennessy Latinx, so Latin America, Africa, Middle East, Caribbean, and Canada. And when I sat in front of him, and I'll tell you how I eventually got to sit in front of him, but when I sat in front of him and we had this wonderful conversation, was the first time that all of these pockets of things made sense. Because prior to that, I was a law graduate with A-levels in maths and economic and French and history. I pursued the corporate law track very briefly. And so around about 2007, 2008, I started to travel. I decided to take time out because I knew that I wanted to get off the corporate law track or the corporate track. I knew that I wanted to connect my work with creativity, culture, but also to have an impact on my country. And I knew that my country was complex. So I spent a month in India. I spent several weeks in China. I spent a month in Paris. I spent a month in New York. And I was traveling the world. And India and China in particular, I went to, this was 2007, I went to China. I went to those countries, especially India, because I wanted to see how a nation that had a similar history in terms of being a former British colony, but also had huge diversity in terms of its ethnicity within the country and the languages spoken, the religions within the country, as well as a massive population, how this country was charting its path forward, because there were so many parallels with Nigeria. And I got lost in forts and palaces and talking with young English and history graduates of Indian origin who were taking my friend and I around as tour guides, and they were filling us with their history. And I'll never forget being at this red fort, observing the restoration of this beautiful mural on the outside or one of the inner courtyards, and them telling us this very detailed story of how the original pigments that were used by craftsmen were no longer in production. So they'd gone to source, the government, the descendants of these families, and they'd had these people bring these original organic pigments, and the restoration work was extraordinary.
Wow.
That trip to India especially unlocked for me all of my hopes for Nigeria and this belief in myself as an individual that could contribute to bringing them about. So after all that wonderful travel, I worked up the confidence and the courage to say to my family, especially my father, that I would not be pursuing a corporate track. And then the big question came, so what are you going to do next then? I moved back in summer of 2008 and said, okay, right, corporate law is not it for me. Culture and history and heritage and art and creativity are very much where I'd like to express myself. But as a law graduate with quite serious A-level results and subjects, it wasn't very obvious where I would land. But my imagination never stopped running. And so all of those internships and projects with fashion designers and filmmakers, I then started to formalize in a sense. So some of the really extraordinary fashion designers today in Nigeria, I knocked on their doors and did things with them like their first lookbooks and photo shoots. And this was the early years of this reemergence of Nigerian creativity. And then I started a small business. I started a small business called Fashion Auction House. And this got me meeting so many different people. It was really fun to organize. And through that work, I then met the market managers for Moët Hennessy working under LVMH in Nigeria. And they, having encountered my Fashion Auction House work, invited me to work on a small project with them called Hennessy Artistry, which was around music with Hennessy Cognac. And that moment for me unlocked a lot, because it was when my interests in creativity and creative expression, but also my capabilities in business kind of came together in this world of marketing and brand management and brand building. I loved the project that I did for them. It was hugely successful. We broke ground for many young talent and many young talented musicians. And then the company invited me and said, would you come in and be our head of communications and events? Which was quite a jump for a very young person at that time. But they were so excited by what I'd helped them do, which they had been struggling for a couple of years in the country to have those kinds of results. So January 2010, I enrolled as head of communications and events, and I started to build a team for Moët Hennessy in Nigeria to build market share for the company in Nigeria. And then that created and began my time of learning with the best in luxury.
This season of Compelling is presented in partnership with Cahiers d'Art, the legendary Paris publisher founded in 1926. For a century, Cahiers d'Art has collaborated with icons like Picasso, Duchamp and Calder, and continues today with leading voices such as Ellsworth Kelly, Philip Perino, Arthur Jaffa and Rosemary Truckle. Cahiers d'Art is also the home of the legendary Picasso Catalogue Raisonné, the definitive 33-volume record of Picasso's work and one of the most important art publications of the 20th century. Beyond publishing, Cahiers d'Art is also a gallery on Rue de Dragon in Paris. You can discover more at cahierdart.com. So fast forward to the next inflection point, which is in 2015, I believe that that was the moment that kind of inspiration struck for the possibility of ArtX Lagos. Have I got the year right?
Yes, you have.
And so I'm interested, you obviously had gained all of this experience, but something entrepreneurial was stirring, and you also wanted to do something that was really impactful for the creatives of a country, and I suppose not only for the shareholders of LVMH.
Yes.
So talk us through how that came about.
Yes, of course. So I was at LVMH from the first product in 2009, then working fully from 2010 to 2012. And then I rose to become head of marketing and was really directing the affairs in Nigeria in that sense. And in all those years, a lot of what I was doing as a head of sponsorship was supporting the arts, music, fashion, film. There were so many extraordinary projects that were coming my way, and I was meeting a lot of people. And I had also begun to collect. I had begun to go to exhibitions and auctions and to buy works by young artists where I could. And then I also began to meet one-on-one a lot of these artists whose work I was very interested in. And round about 2012, I decided to launch a consulting business that would support creative entrepreneurs and creative visionaries to bring their visions to life. And those years were wonderful for me. This takes us to about 2013, 2014. And they were great years of exploration. So I was supporting an entrepreneur called Renny Folario, an incredible creative visionary who wanted to create the first luxury concept store in Nigeria, Alara. And I was also working with the fashion designer Makio, who would go on to be worn by Beyonce and Michelle Obama and incredible figures around the world. And working with them, traveling with them, supporting them on their visions, helping them think about the business side to what they were trying to do, but also the creative inspiration. I was meeting a lot of young artists who desired to have someone like me support them in their careers. But I recognized that a platform for the industry, as opposed to this individual way of working, could really be instrumental. Fast forward to 2015, I decided to do an MBA at INSEAD, and I was between the France and Singapore campuses. And this was when we had the Venice Biennale in 2015 that was organized by the late Tokini Wesley. So I went to see. And yes, Venice was a major inspiration point for me, because by virtue of it being curated by Tokini Wesley, there was the involvement of so many African artists in so many diverse ways. Now, many of the Nigerian artists I knew personally, and it was wonderful to see their work on the walls of the Arsenali, the Giardini, and to see so many people from around the world interacting and navigating through their work. But as I watched all of these people observe this artwork, I recognized that it would be extraordinary, as opposed to African artists consistently having to present their work outside of the continent, to have a moment to bring the world to us, to bring the world to Nigeria, where context would exist. And with that context, I believe would come even deeper and greater appreciation. And so the Venice Biennale in 2015 was really instrumental on my journey. I went back to my business school. I was taking an entrepreneurship elective at the time, and was then joined, after I shared this idea with my class, was then joined by 5 friends, none of whom were African. They were German, Korean, Irish, etc. And we became this team that were exploring whether there was merit in this idea. It was a wonderful time of exploration and discovery, speaking to different players in the art world in Africa. So a lot of the artists that I knew personally, we were speaking to them as a group. Gallerists as well, some of whom I knew personally, others that I was meeting for the first time. Just trying to understand whether the possibilities that I saw were real and what they could mean. And so I got back to Nigeria in 2016, in January 2016, and was resolved to make this fair happen.
Did Lagos feel ready to you? Like, you had the idea, you saw that these artists whom you knew were being taken seriously on the walls in the Arsenale and everything at the Biennale. But, you know, Lagos, it wasn't infrastructurally sort of where other cities that host art fairs are. So just in very practical terms, you know, what had to happen next? Because it's a jump from
It
theoretical entrepreneurship team idea.
It was a big jump. It was a very big jump. But by that time, you know, by the time that I was at INSEAD and by the time that this idea was formulating, I had also already delivered very ambitious projects in Nigeria.
Yeah.
And this actually would later become one of the things that I would say to prospective sponsors and galleries. I was probably the only person in the country by that time who'd done the full gamut of incredibly intricate and detailed experiences around champagne and fine dining with Dom Perignon, for example, and then straddled all the way through to concerts for 3,000 young people around Hennessy and musicians. So I had such breadth in terms of the kinds of experiences that I had put together, the communication around those experiences. And then I married that with a very deep love for the arts, for culture, for storytelling, and also for what they could do for us as Africans in terms of our identity, shaping and building and strengthening that. So when I was back in Nigeria in January 2016, reflecting on this idea and deciding whether I would go ahead to do it. Yes, it is true that Lagos was not ready in terms of its infrastructure. Very true. And we later saw that when we delivered the first fair against all odds. But in terms of the timing for the art sector, it was spot on. Mm-hmm. Because in 2016, Nigerian music was beginning to make tremendous waves across the African continent and even internationally. Our fashion was starting to be heralded in really extraordinary ways. The film industry was doing a lot as well. But the visual art sector did not have the visibility that it needed, not for a lack of talent or for a lack of creative production. Artists had been producing tremendous work for decades. But the visual art sector was lagging behind these other creative contemporaries. And I felt that if three things could be resolved, it could be explosive. The first was opening up the art sector and making it accessible to so many more people. In those years, exhibitions were very small, very private, intimate affairs. Only collectors really knew about them and could even access them. When I thought about the challenges the young artists had expressed to me about their thinking that they could only have successful careers overseas, I recognized that if we didn't open up the space and open it up to young people from diverse backgrounds, that momentum would never build for the artists at home. The second thing was also entering into a dialogue with the rest of Africa. Nigeria was being looked to by many across Africa as a hub that could welcome the rest of the continent and really breed that fraternity around the exploration of creativity and cultural exchange. Nigeria had hosted in 1977 the largest world festival of Black art in the world, and people had come from all over the continent and the diaspora. And so artists and gallerists were looking to Nigeria for that opening up as well to them. That was a major thing I wanted to address. And the final one was creating a moment for us on the global calendar. Because taking it back to Venice and what I had seen, I felt very strongly that if we could bring the world home to us for a change, as opposed to African artists or African individuals always having to leave to seek prosperity elsewhere, it could be truly transformative. So those were the major underpinnings driving my motivation. And so yes, there were infrastructure challenges. Yes, there were obstacles, but all I could see was the possibility. And so I went for it.
It's fantastic and visionary. I mean, really, the word is overused, but it really does seem like you had not just that you saw an opportunity, but you had as you've said, like a deep love and an intuition that really the timing was right.
Yeah.
And that the rest could be overcome. How did you set about convincing those first kind of major galleries to believe in the idea?
So, interestingly enough, we didn't have to do a lot of convincing because local galleries instantly understood the opportunity and what it could be. Mm-hmm. They were very keen to participate. And when it came to local galleries, I had the relationships as well with a number of them that made it easy for them to understand what I could bring into the space. Internationally, I was working very closely with the late curator, Bissy Silva, and we approached Pan-African galleries, who were also many of the galleries that my team and I had discussed with at length to understand whether this could really take root in Nigeria. Mm-hmm. And so we had galleries come from South Africa, from Ghana, from across the continent, very keen and eager to see if this Artex Lagos that was being created could be an opening for them to access Nigeria and to build relationships with Nigerian artists, collectors, etc. The bigger convincing was to do with our financial sponsors, actually. And I remember the former CEO of one of the biggest banks in Nigeria, who would become our biggest sponsor, and maybe in our second or third meeting, asking me why I felt that I was the person that could get this done. Why should it be me that he backed to get this done? And I very simply said all the things that I've told you. Mm-hmm. I told him my story. I told him about my love for this, my passion, my belief in it, but also the strengths that I had coming from a world of luxury brand management and experiences and communication. I remember when he decided to take a gamble on me, it was a very important moment because that then also set a wheel in motion and many other organizations coming on board. Such that when we opened, our opening night was the 4th of November, Friday, 4th of November, 2016. It was unbelievable. It was electric. It's difficult now to find one or two words to explain how alive that first edition was and how excited Lagos was by it. How it confirmed so strongly what I had believed and wondered about, and my conviction.
A little more about our sponsor. In 2026, Cahiers d'Art celebrates its centennial, 100 years at the heart of modernism. To mark the occasion, Cahiers d'Art will stage a global programme of exhibitions at the Musée Picasso in Paris, the MoMA in New York, the Guggenheim Collection in Venice, and many more museums worldwide. Alongside these, a landmark centennial book and new editions of the Historic Review will honour a century of creativity. You can discover more at cahierdart.com. When we spoke last week, I was surprised by something that you told me, which is that actually Lagos doesn't have that many cultural institutions, museums, permanent homes for artists and cultural programming.
Yeah.
I was thinking afterwards, this could be a place for you to go next, but I know that your plans are under wraps for now. But are there other people who are part of the ecosystem who are kind of addressing that as I was going to say problem, but as a challenge, to inaugurate those kinds of spaces?
I think a lot of people are. Lagos is one of those places where it's very difficult to just be one very specialized thing. Take Artex Lagos. It's an art fair, yes, but it has so many expressions of a cultural festival. It runs an educational program. We run initiatives for young artists, cultural exchange programs. Very few fairs around the world even think of such things. And why are we thinking of them? Because we see ourselves as catalysts for the ecosystem. Now, your question about other players, many other players are in a similar boat. You may start out wanting to create a gallery, but in the process recognize that the artist you're supporting need more from you, or that to build a pipeline of artists for your gallery, you have to actually get involved in supporting arts education and the arts universities.
And people need studios.
And people need studios. So, and also Nigerians, we are generally very entrepreneurial, very enterprising people.
Yeah.
So there's very few individuals working in the art world today in Nigeria who are doing just one thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so, yes, Lagos still has so much room for the development of its infrastructure for the arts.
Mm-hmm.
But there's a very concerted movement of people who are deliberately and intentionally building that infrastructure.
Mm.
In other parts of the world, the state builds a lot of that infrastructure.
Yeah.
In Nigeria, we don't wait for the state. We just get moving.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So going back a little bit in time, before it was an established success, was there ever a moment that you thought, oh my God, it might all collapse? How am I going to save the situation?
I think the moment that comes to mind is probably one that every art fair or festival director dealt with, and that's 2020, when COVID hit.
Sure. Yeah.
And I remember just freezing and saying to myself, what will become of what we've created? Because whilst fairs in the West were talking about the future of digital, and there was this idea for a moment that fairs, for example, would always have to be permanently digital, I knew, and my team, we knew that intrinsically that our audiences needed that physical experience.
Yeah.
And so the question was, okay, yes, we can go ahead and build a digital fair for our 2020 edition, which we did from scratch. But the concern about the future of the platform was intense. We also had social unrest in that year in Nigeria, in that just as America was facing Black Lives Matter, for example, and many countries around the world erupted in protests of different natures. We had local protests around NSARS and police brutality that had young people taking to the streets and expressing their desire for a freer, fairer, and more just police system and society. And what that moment ended up doing for us, though, was extraordinary challenge, but it also unlocked a lot for us as Artex Lagos, recognizing that Artex, being in service of Lagos and Nigeria, also needed to evolve to become a center and a space for dialogue around the pertinent issues in Nigeria. And that began another evolution for Artex Lagos as a platform. Mm-hmm. So we went from debating whether this platform could continue to exist to actually finding ourselves being challenged to see how we could better serve our environment through the arts, and leveraging art as a means for the exchange of ideas, a space for clarity and inspiration, art as a vehicle for learning, a connection to our past, but as a means to reflect on our future. And this is how we started to shift and evolve the fair even more rapidly, such that by the 10th edition, we had a very ambitious exhibition, a historical exhibition, showing images of Lagos in the 1950s, 60s, and 70s through remarkable photographer J.D. Ojekere. And that's just one example of some of the responses that we had to have after this almost this very difficult year.
Yeah. That is the great power of art and cultural exchange enabled by art, is that these incredibly difficult subjects, whether it's political or racial or all of it, can be addressed, but in a sort of safe space. It can be a form of protest. It can be a form of joy. It can be a form of anger expressed.
Exactly.
And all of that, especially when you're talking about younger audiences, people coming to art who might not otherwise have been exposed to it previously. I think that if you can see your anger reflected or your joy reflected, this is also, it's a form of connection that can actually diffuse many of those anxieties and those problems, because you start to feel better understood.
Because everything that you've just described is precisely what we saw and experienced. And as our fair and its programming began to evolve to speak more closely to what was going on in society through our special exhibitions, our projects, and yes, collectors were still doing their thing, you know, with the galleries and artists they came to buy. But as that evolved, this cultural aspect, we found that our audiences in turn wanted to express themselves and express the impact that the conversations through our exhibitions were having on them. And this was how Speaker's Corner came about. So every year now we've challenged ourselves to create a different way, sometimes around gamification a bit, but a different way for audiences to express what they're feeling, to channel some of what they've seen at the fair, some of what they've brought with them into the fair, to have that place for their own voices to be heard. And we found it's been very powerful indeed.
As we're talking and you're describing Artex Lagos, I'm wondering that, I mean, there are so many art fairs in Europe and America, I'm thinking of specifically, where you walk around. I mean, friends of mine, as I'm sure friends of yours have complained to me previously, they walk into an art fair, they actually do have money to spend, and they're treated with this kind of, with a degree of skepticism by the gallery employees who are there on the booth. I wonder whether African gallerists and maybe artists too, maybe they are more prepared to have this kind of open dialogue and for an art fair to feel like it's open access. I don't think that the galleries that attend Art Basel or Frieze, they're not really that interested. I mean, the fairs themselves may be interested in having those educational touch points and bringing in the general public. But the galleries, they're not really game.
It's understandable when galleries think that. I think in our case, first, we work with a very committed group of galleries who all buy into this vision of the growth of the art ecosystem, and that growth being eventually expressed as patronage, but just even beginning with access. An enabling of the culture of looking. I remember the first time I came across that sentence, that phrase, the culture of looking. And it's precisely what we desired to induce when we launched the fair. You know, I talked earlier about some of the platforms we had that were more skewed towards younger people to signal to them that they were welcome within this experience. And the galleries that are part of Artex Lagos today are very much bought in to that idea that, yes, you could spend your time simply trying to identify more mature individuals who you think may have the spending power for the artwork. That's fine. But if you are thinking about the longevity of this work, you're thinking about the growth of that patronage, then you do have to be prepared a bit to participate in that process. And what we found is that actually many of the galleries are now very excited to be part of a catalyzing platform such as this that is doing that work, and they're part of the bigger conversation.
Are the galleries that are coming, are they going to other big international art fairs as well?
Increasingly they are.
Yeah.
They're participating in Frieze. They're participating in Art Basel. They recognize that what we are doing at home is building for the future in a way that is quite different from when they go to international art fairs. Artex Lagos is not a typical art fair. Everything we do, or everything that gets presented within the experience, is setting a standard and sending a message to a burgeoning arts ecosystem of what we validate and value. And so that comes with quite a bit of responsibility in a sense, and a need to ensure that our mission is never compromised or diluted.
And you've mentioned how involved you are, but now, of course, you live most of the time at least, in Europe, in Paris, which is where we met.
Yeah.
So what challenges does that present for you now?
A few challenges. So first, I am going back and forth between Paris and Lagos, but I'm not fixed in Lagos as I was in the earlier years of Artex Lagos's journey. And also, a number of very key individuals in my team are similarly doing that dance between Lagos and elsewhere in the world. And what it means is that we have to work twice as hard to have our fingers on the pulse. Because with Artex Lagos having become a space of dialogue for the city, dialogue between its citizens, but also dialogue with the citizens and the rest of the world, we've had to really try to develop means and mechanisms to ensure that what is being curated, what is being presented, is still representative or relevant even to the city and its people. And that definitely becomes more challenging when you are, for example, consuming the news about Nigeria from the outside as opposed to the inside. And I can't say that we've perfectly resolved it, but we're working overtime. We've been working overtime to ensure that we're very careful about that.
You don't have a crystal ball. And you said in our preparation, you said, I don't have a crystal ball. So I've cut a lot of these questions about,
Good.
as much as you're prepared to say, Tokini, looking ahead, what are the next frontiers for Artex Lagos? Is it scale or depth, or is it doing something else altogether with the brand that you have now built?
So the truth is that what I am with the team obsessing over at the moment is the fact that everything we set out to do in the first year, which was 2016, we've done. We wanted to open up the art world, build more patronage, but also bring in a diverse audience. It's done. Whether you look at Artex Lagos events or even the average art exhibition in the city, people are empowered, people are emboldened to walk into the space and they're welcome. It's done. The second challenge was building a bridge with the rest of Africa. Now there are collaborations that are exciting and wonderful between Lagosians and those of other cities. It's done. And then creating the moment for Lagos on the Global Arts Calendar. It's done. Hundreds and thousands of people are flying in every year, and Lagos has its permanent fixture. It's done. So when you have that spirit or culture of being catalysts for an ecosystem, one thing you will never really do is just sit and settle with a form of status quo. So the big question that we've been resolving for is, which of the challenges in front of us do we wish to dive deep into as a means of being even more greatly impactful on this city and this country that so deeply inspire us? So that's where we're at. And that's where I'll stop.
Okay, and then stay tuned and check the Artex Lagos website. Okay, well, I'm going to finish now with some sort of light questions.
Okay.
But I would start with, do you remember some good advice you were given? Or, I mean, conversely, it could be bad advice you were given that you would never give on to anybody else. But advice you were given, and then the other side of that coin is, what advice do you give? And that can be in life generally, or within arts and culture more specifically.
The thing that comes to mind is something that was very simply said to me at the start of my entrepreneurial journey. It's just trust yourself. And when I have, budding entrepreneurs come and ask me questions and they sit and we talk, it's very interesting how, as entrepreneurs, you start out with a conviction, but then life happens and reality happens, and so many different things can make you question what you originally saw, or question even your ability to hear yourself. And so I find that that advice that I received, which I do reflect on when things are a bit murky and less clear, has been very helpful. But it's very simple. Trust yourself.
This leads me to an unscripted question. But do you have a mentor? Have you got a mentor, somebody that pings to mind?
I've got a few. It may seem a bit cheesy, but my parents are my first mentors. Because they've both taught me and continue to teach me in extraordinary ways. Then I've had wonderful mentorship from Ngone Fall, who is a Senegalese art historian, curator, and critic. She has been beyond instrumental to the Artex Lagos journey, beyond. I have a mentor-mentee relationship with my coach, who's been my coach for several years, Ade Martins, where we go beyond the limits of coaching, and actually many times I'm seeking his advice just as an incredibly wise individual. I've had mentorship from a friend, Peter Gaya-Sabasaki, who's a partner at McKinsey in Nigeria, and has helped me tremendously in thinking about things from an entrepreneurial perspective or from a corporate and business thinking perspective. Yeah, quite a lot of them.
Do you have any habits that keep you productive and sane?
I have a new habit that I'm really enjoying. It's walking for an hour every morning.
Where do you walk? Or do you vary that?
I actually don't vary it. I walk round the Champ de Mars and I go through the different lanes, and I find it very therapeutic just going through these various lanes, and I can completely tune out my mind. And it's becoming very addictive for me. I do my best thinking when I walk, and afterwards as well. There is something that the motion, which is so natural and so simple, but I take very large strides and I do it very quickly. There is a release that it brings to my mind during the moment and afterwards as well. Yeah.
You know what I realised also as because I ran through the Champ de Mars this morning, and there's so much bird song, and actually that where I live, there are no trees on the street.
Oh, wow.
And actually there aren't many places. I mean, if you walk along the river, which actually I do love to do, but there are no birds.
Yeah.
There are a few pigeons.
Yeah.
A few rats.
And that's why I love the Champ de Mars. It's not the most beautiful garden in Paris, certainly not. But the trees and, the lanes where, and this is a very Parisian thing, where you have the trees kind of meeting at the top, or almost meeting in the case of the Champ de Mars, and the birds and the rustle and the leaves. I love it.
Yeah. Now, this one can be, if you're an avid reader, which I suspect you are, it can be just the last book that really made an impression on you, or it can be the book.
The book is tough, but there's one book that sticks out for me just because of the theme of our conversation.
Yeah.
And this is a book by a Kenyan author, actually, Ngugi wa Thiong'o, called Decolonizing the Mind, which was so affirming for me when I read it in terms of beliefs I've always had about the disconnect between, or the disconnect that occurred in the years of colonialism in Africa. It was really transformative for me. Yeah, it's a really, really powerful book.
What's the last artwork that you bought?
Ooh, what's the last artwork I bought? I bought a print recently by Susan Wenger. Susan Wenger was very active in Nigeria in the 50s, 60s, and 70s. An Austrian artist who developed the Mbari workshops in Nigeria and Oshogbo. Oshogbo is now a World Heritage Site, which is renowned for its annual spiritual festival. And she was the teacher and mentor to many extraordinary artists, extraordinary Nigerian artists. And she ended up living there and working there as a priestess, and eventually died there as well. And I bought a print of hers from the Gallery Co., which is the Yoruba myth around the creation of the world. So she has tried to present in figurative form these deities on that mission by the creator.
if there were no time constraints and no budgetary constraints, do you have a dream project?
Yes. Yes, I have a dream project that I dreamt up in my years in England. I would create what I guess you could loosely call cultural embassies for Africa all over the world. Mm-hmm. I would create these remarkable buildings filled with art and food and music and film and literature and language courses and these complete cultural immersions for Nigerian culture, West African culture, maybe even Pan-African in a sense. And I would have them in the world's major capital cities, but also in major capitals on the African continent. Mm-hmm. And they would be spaces for just meeting, dialogue, community, and exploration and education. That's what I would do.
Okay. Well, that's a beautiful concept. It would cost
maybe
a
one
fortune,
day. It would cost an absolute. You said no budget,
but I did say no budget. Well, on that beautiful idea, we're going to conclude. Thank you very much for agreeing to be a guest, for being so generous with your ideas and your story, and your time.
Thank you for having me. Thank you for having me. I've
pleasure.
enjoyed the conversation.
Me too. Thank you. I hope you enjoyed today's episode of Compelling. I've been overwhelmed by encouragement and positivity since beginning this podcast. If you'd like to support, please share, follow, and subscribe wherever you access your podcasts. It really helps the show to grow. Thank you for listening to Compelling.